Apple Mac Studio, early 2025. Review. Renewed vigor with M4 Max and M3 Ultra. Apple's new Mac Studio doesn't look different on the outside, but there are plenty of performance upgrades under the hood. Hello everyone, welcome back. Let's talk about Apple Mac Studio 2025 M4 Max and M3 Ultra. This is only a review based on gathered information. Please do not be swayed by advertisements, and choose and buy with open eyes, free from any promotions. The new Mac Studio continues Apple's practice of placing its homegrown ARM-based chips into a workstation chassis far more compact than what we find in its PC counterparts. While you might not immediately be clued into just how powerful Apple's new Mac Studio is by looking at it, don't be fooled. While the previous generation Mac Studio with M2 Ultra was powerful, Apple has dialed up performance even more with this generation. Apple is aiming the Mac Studio with M4 Max at creative professionals, particularly photographers, video editors, and engineers, among others. Design of the Mac Studio 2025. Apple has not changed the design of this year's Mac Studio, which is a good thing. The chassis is 7.7 inches wide, 7.7 inches deep, and 3.7 inches tall. Our M4 Max review unit weighs 6.1 pounds, 2.77 kilograms, while our M3 Ultra unit weighs a more substantial 8 pounds, 3.62 kilograms, due to its inclusion of a larger copper heatsink to keep thermals in check. The M4 Max system has two USB-C ports up front that support 10 GB per second speeds and an SDXC, UHS-2, card slot. The M3 Ultra also has an SDXC card slot, but its two USB-C ports support Thunderbolt 5 at speeds up to 120 gigabits per second. The port allotment on the back of the two systems is identical. You'll find 4 Thunderbolt 5 ports, 2 USB-A ports, 5 gigabits per second, an HDMI 2.1 port, 3.5mm headphone jack, and a 10 gigabits per second Ethernet port. The Mac Studio has Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.3 for wireless connectivity. Even though Wi-Fi 7 is becoming more commonplace on high-end PC motherboards, laptops, and desktops, Apple hasn't yet made that shift with the Mac Studio. Above the rear ports you'll find a large panel with exhaust holes for the internal fan. Cool air is drawn in from the bottom of the unit. We've grown accustomed to Macs not allowing for hardware upgrades post-purchase, with the exception of the Mac Pro storage. That remains the case with the Mac Studio. CPU, RAM, and storage configurations must be selected at the time of purchase. If you get your Mac Studio home and want to later add more memory, you're out of luck. Technically, the internal SSD is removable, but Apple's OnSoC encryption protocols make a DIY change difficult. But that's a risky proposition for a workstation-grade system that starts at $1,999 and can creep into 5-digit territory with all the trends. M3 Ultra and M4 Max performance on the Mac Studio. The M4 Max is a known quantity. This is the same chip that debuted with the most recent refresh of the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros. Our M4 Max review unit has a 16-core CPU, 12 performance cores, for efficiency cores, 40-core GPU, 128 GB of unified memory, and a 128 GB SSD. The M3 Ultra is the more interesting of the two chips, and not just because it isn't called the M4 Ultra. Apple's official response to the lack of an M4 Ultra is that not every generation of its M-series chip will get an Ultra variant. So, that leaves us with the M3 Ultra, which joins together two M3 Max chips. They are joined using what Apple eloquently calls Ultra Fusion. The 184 billion transistor chip inside our review unit has 32 cores, 24 performance cores, 8 efficiency cores, and can be paired with up to 512 gigabytes of unified memory, 256 gigabytes in our review unit, and delivers a maximum of 819 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth. Apple says that customers opting for the full 512 gigabytes allotment can run large language models, LLMs, that have up to 600 billion parameters completely within memory. Given that our review unit also has a fully enabled version of the M3 Ultra, it also incorporates 80 GPU cores, up from a maximum of 70 on the previous generation M2 Ultra. It also has a 32-core neural processing unit, NPU, and a dedicated hardware media engine for H.256, HEVC, and ProRes encoding/decoding. Joining our M3 Ultra and M4 Max review units in our testing are two PC-centric workstation chips, Intel's Xeon W9-3495X and AMD's Threadripper Pro 5995WX. We already had systems built around these processors in-house, so it seemed appropriate to compare them. The Xeon W9-3495X is a 56-core chip with a $5,889 MSRP. The Threadripper Pro 5995WX is a 64-core chip with a suggested retail price of $6,499. Those are before being built into systems, so it's a big difference from Apple, which makes entire PCs, not just chips. We started our benchmarks with the Geekbench 6.4 CPU test. Here, the M3 Ultra delivered a single-core score of 3,349, putting it well ahead of the M2 Ultra, 2,815, and beyond what's possible with our AMD and Intel workstation systems. Apple's decision to use two different generations of SoCs in the new Mac Studio shows the first quirk in our testing when it comes to the M4 Max. The M4 Max uses TSMC's second-generation 3nm process node, along with a new, faster, and more powerful CPU architecture. Geekbench reported that our M3 Ultra ran at 4.05 GHz, while the M4 Max ran at 4.5 GHz. As a result, the M4 Max put up a single-core score of 4,113. Multi-core performance was surprisingly close between the two, despite the M3 Ultra having double the cores. The M3 Ultra scored 27,929 on the multi-core benchmark, while the M4 Max wasn't too far behind at 26,966. Our file transfer test involves copying 25 gigabytes of mixed media files. The M3 Ultra finished the task, recording 2,685 megabytes per second along the way, while the M4 Max hit 2,441 megabytes per second, essentially tying the result of the last M2 Ultra Mac Studio that we tested. The Mac Studio with M3 Ultra really stretched its legs in our handbrake test, which involves transcoding a 4K video file to 1080p. The M3 Ultra completed the task in just 1 minute and 16 seconds compared to 1 minute and 56 seconds for the M4 Max. The Mac Studio with M2 Ultra finished in 2:45. The Xeon and Threadripper systems finished the transcode in roughly 2:40. Moving on to the Xcode benchmark, which we use for simulating a large development project, the M3 Ultra finished in 64 seconds, which was an oddity compared to the M2 Ultra, which took just 58 seconds. The M4 Max completed the task in 79 seconds. Using Cinebench 2024, we stress-tested the M3 Ultra and M4 Max over 10 runs in the multi-core benchmark. The M3 Ultra started the test just under 3,000, but remained consistently between 3,000 and 3,100 through the subsequent runs. The M4 Max, on the other hand, hovered between 2,050 and 2,100. We also use Cinebench 2024 to measure CPU temperatures, and TG Pro is our go-to macOS utility for measuring this data. TG Pro doesn't fully support the M3 Ultra yet, but showed a system temperature of 43 degrees Celsius, 109.4 Fahrenheit, while the M4 Max measured 42 degrees Celsius, 107.6 Fahrenheit. We use the Blender benchmark for testing performance applying visual effects and 3D modeling. We tested the CPU and GPU on the Mac Studio systems, while only the CPU was tested on the Xeon and Threadripper systems. While the M3 Ultra put up a valiant fight in Monster, 339.9 samples per second, it was still no match for the core-packed Xeon, 446.67, and Threadripper, 485.33. The M4 Max was further behind at 240.52. It was a similar story in Junk Shop, where the M3 Ultra and M4 Max recorded 243.2 and 153.9, respectively, compared to 302 and 350 for the Xeon and Threadripper. Finally, the classroom test, 173.3 for the M3 Ultra, 104.28 for the M4 Max, chalked up another win for the x86-64 stalwarts, 212.33 for the Xeon, 230 for the Threadripper. However, the M3 Ultra had the last laugh when switching to the GPU testing, where it absolutely clobbered the competition. The M3 Ultra hit 3,246.45 samples per second in Monster, 1,581.17 in Junk Shop, and 1,643.26 in Classroom. The M4 Max also had a strong showing at 2,344.09, 1,271.57, and 1,234.93, respectively. To test the gaming acumen of the new Mac Studios, I opted to try Resident Evil Village. I tested both systems with a 49-inch Philips Evnia 8000 DQHD 240Hz QD-OLED gaming monitor. The game looked absolutely brilliant with all detail, settings maxed out, and with Metal FX upscaling turned on. I saw around 100 frames per second on the M3 Studio and around 80 frames per second on the M4 Max at 5120 by 1440. My daily driver is a 14-inch MacBook Pro with an M3 Pro processor and 36 GB of RAM. Either variant of the Mac Studio was overkill for my daily needs. I was never left wanting for more performance while gaming, editing photos in Pixelmator Pro, now an Apple app, or editing videos of my kids. Final results. The Mac Studio is a fascinating product. For less than the cost of just a Xeon or Threadripper workstation processor, you can get a fully functioning Mac OS machine with some serious horsepower under the hood. The M3 Ultra dominated most of our CPU tests, except for the single-threaded Geekbench test that favored the M4 Max, and the Blender CPU tests which favored the Xeon and the Threadripper with their huge advantage in core counts. The M3 Studio blew through our handbrake transcode test in record time, aced our file transfer test, and held its own on the Blender CPU benchmark tests against the Intel and AMD competition. However, when we switched to the GPU in the Blender tests, the Mac Studio blew the doors off the competition, with the M4 Max trailing not too far behind. The new Mac Studios achieves these feats silently, as even under full load, I could only hear the dual internal fans if my ear was up against the exhaust vent. But for all its pluses, the Mac Studio still has some downsides. There's no way to upgrade your memory or SSD after purchase, so you'll need to forecast what your needs will be a few years down the road regarding hardware resources. Also, memory and SSD upgrade prices are far pricier than what you find on the PC side. But if you're firmly in the Apple camp, or even a PC stalwart that doesn't mind expanding his or her horizons to the macOS realm, the Mac Studio remains a compelling choice in a compact package.